Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with us tonight. I'm so excited to finally have in-person book launch and signing because we've really missed those. And, you know, we hope to have many more. And hopefully COVID rears its ugly head really, really far till it disappears. So today we're here to celebrate the debut of Camille Gomera-Tavarez, High Spirits. Camille is an Afro-Dominican writer, designer, and creative from New Jersey. She has a BFA in graphic design and creative writing from the Maryland Institute College of Arts and is currently based in Philadelphia. High Spirits is her debut. It is a collection of 11 interconnected short stories from the Dominican diaspora from debut author, It is a book centered on the extended family, the Beléns, across multiple generations. It is set in the fictional small town of Hidalpa and Santo Domingo and Paterson and San Juan and Washington Heights too. It is told in a style both utterly real and distinctly magical. And its stories explore machismo, mental health, family, and identity. But most of all, High Spirits represents the first book from Camille, who takes her place as one of the most extraordinary new voices to emerge in years. Welcome, Camille.
Thank you so much. And thank you for agreeing to be here. I'm like fangirling because you do so much for the community and following Dominican writers for a long time. So thank you for being here, Angie. Yeah, I'm Camille. This is my book. It came out this week. So I'm just gonna do a little reading for you. So I'm reading from a story called Malo, and this is the second half, where we have a character called Cristabel who is recounting after going back to DR. She's on a plane going back to New York, and she's remembering her childhood working at her grandfather's store. So. One winter, when Krista was about 10 years of age, she sat in the living room, contently reading Roald Dahl's Matilda, to the puzzlement of her horde of female cousins, who had gone out to the baseball park to watch local boys practice. Krista didn't like baseball parks so much. The steel bleachers were invariably hot, and the older boys would often make fun of them, mostly of her and her weird American accent. Before she'd entered the park, she had seldom been aware that she even possessed an accent. She had just turned a fresh page of her book when her abuelo emerged from his bedroom and asked her, in his thick country accent, if she could man the colmado for him. He wore a childlike grin, begging her to indulge him in this transparent attempt at connecting with his American granddaughter. She felt her adolescent nerves bubbling up slightly at the possibility of social interaction, which his invitation suggested. But she closed her book and followed behind him in his worn linen trousers anyways. Abuelo's colmado was attached to the side of the house, with the back entrance of the store running right through the old couple's tiny bedroom. Behind vanity mirrors stained with brown photographs and draping mosquito nets and drying bed sheets. She kept following him through the dimly lit room. As he lifted the final hanging bed sheet that served as a barrier between the house and work, Crista's eyes discovered a new perspective on the family store. Traje tu nieta para que te acompañe, mi negra, he spoke to his wife, who sat behind the cash register, holding a worn notebook and pencil. Her abuela's eyes lit up at the sight of the girl. They were cloudy behind her thick glasses. Her gnarled hands brought Crista's 10-year-old cheek to her lips and motioned toward the wooden chair beside her own. She was sitting in that chair like it had taken her a long time to get in it, and it would take her a long time to get out. Crista's abuelo smiled profusely, exchanging his gaze between the two. Crista wondered what task he felt he had achieved to be glowing with so much pride. Vengo ahora, and then he disappeared behind the bedsheet without waiting for a response. The elderly woman inched her glasses higher up her nose with the back of her wrinkled thumb and returned to the complex accounting work she seemed to be doing. Siéntate, niña. Crista finally took a seat beside her. It always seemed so important to her grandparents that Crista and the other children be seated. She was a girl who didn't talk much, and her abuela knew this. They sat in silence amongst the buzzing of the store. Crista telepathically thanked her abuela for not pressing her with cordial questions. The temperature was too high that morning for cordial questions. A dusty fan spun above them on the ceiling. Taking a look around her, Crista realized she'd never really known how much the colmado had to offer. Two men in the front of the store were drinking beer by a tall table and listening to the radio. There were plantains, bananas, ropes of garlic, and onions hanging from the ceiling above, ripe for plucking at the request of a customer. The glass counter before her contained a rainbow array of fruit-flavored candies. Krista did her best to suppress the urge to slip a tamarind chew in her pocket. And even knowing the back fridge was at her disposal, she found it hard to resist the pull of the bright soda fridge in front. Just as Krista was hoping she wouldn't actually have to do any work, a man wearing a sleeveless shirt entered the store in quick strides. He looked to the small, nervous girl behind the counter and asked, "A cómo son los plátanos?" Krista momentarily froze in shock that she could be mistaken for someone who knew the answer. Before she could panic, her abuela, still looking down as she counted coins between her wrinkled hands, whispered, "Dile que son 5 pesos." Without even giving a second thought, Krista replied to the man in Spanish, plucked the fruit from above her, handed him his plátanos, took his 25 pesos, handed back 2 10-peso coins, and bid farewell with a cheerful "gracias," a successful transaction. He disappeared as quickly as he entered. Krista's heart was pounding. His face had not given any indication that she had revealed herself as an American. Was it natural instinct? The accent and mannerisms of her ancestors finally kicking in? She was just about to present a proud smile to her abuela when she heard the crashing of coins on the ground. Her abuela sat with her hands laid out for half a second before giving a little chuckle at her own silliness. She glanced up at her granddaughter above the rim of her glasses, and Krista could see a spark of youthfulness beneath her cloudy hazel eyes. A moment more of the coins remaining on the ground between them almost caused Krista herself to let out a laugh. But then her abuela suddenly appeared from behind the bedsheet again, like a flash of lightning before the torrential rains that sometimes overtook the town of Hidalpa. A fast anger was behind his eyes. The change in emotions was so abrupt it made Krista fall back in her chair. He asked, what had happened? Can't he leave the store with her for 2 minutes? Is she really getting this old? No, she can't get away with this. Ridiculous. And in front of the girl? Krista stared, wondering if she should intervene, knowing her limitations as a child, even worse, as a girl. She had never feared her abuela before. He demanded his wife get down on the ground and pick up the coins. His accusing finger forcefully prompted her to action. At this, Krista finally attempted to bend down to pick them up herself, but she was met with her abuela's hand on her chest. No, déjala. Krista said nothing, but her eyes made their own lasting judgments. Memory would warp her impression of this moment when it returned to her at age 25 on a plane back to New York City. But the picture of her abuela giving this command would remain unfaded. She watched in pain as the woman slowly hiked up her thin dress and bent her old swollen knees before her rigid husband. Krista looked tensely between the two. Her abuela looked up at her granddaughter briefly as she collected the coins in her palms. Sweat was building on her face. Her glasses were slipping away from her button nose. Her glasses were slipping away from her button nose. Then the most curious smirk curled on the edge of her lips. All at once she was saying, I'm sorry, dear. And he's an old fool, isn't he? It was as if the punchline to its sad inside joke had been delivered, and Krista, in the way children do, understood something in what she did not understand. She did not return her abuela's smile. She did not feel like laughing. At the baggage claim of JFK Terminal 5, Krista wondered why she had never told her father about her morning working at the colmado as a child. She had left him now on the other side, working his shift as his father's nurse. She remembered contemplating telling him that very same afternoon over supper when she was 10 years old. It was as she had been passing him the plate of cut avocados that she decided not to. The way he smiled gingerly at the swells in her abuela's feet helped her see his father's place at the head of the table. His aged face growing identical to his mother's with time as he played her part now in the stage reenactment of the old house. Isabel realized her father must have already known that her abuela's inside jokes. He had learned to laugh. She wondered if one day, far off in the distance of a classic Hidalpan sunset, she would ever find herself in on the joke. Thank you.
Thank you for that great read. So High Spirits is a collection of stories that centers on one extended Dominican family. Can you tell us how much of that family resembles yours?
Yeah, I think I definitely drew a lot of inspiration from the stories that, I would always hear growing up from, especially my father's side of the family. But it's always like just like a little bit like layered in like fiction and combinations of like multiple different people to make each of the characters. But for sure, like I dedicate the front of the work to my family and the stories that they told me just for that reason, because a lot of it is just like taking a memory and then just like layering it in fiction.
So I assume you had some family members that read the story and said, "Oh, that's me." Or I could veo un poquito de mí in that person, right? I see a little bit.
It's usually not them that they're pointing to, and I'm like, actually, you're like this other character. So
Everybody wants to be part of a story, especially such a great debut novel. So I listened to your podcast with Las Musas. I was very proud to listen to it for so many reasons. But I discovered that this was part of a thesis project. Could you share that with the crowd?
Sure. So I graduated college in 2019. I went to MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art, and I had like a dual sort of thesis because I did graphic design, but I also did creative writing. And the creative writing one was like less intense, but I decided to like just make more work for myself and like make it into a chapbook that I then designed and like printed and handed out as well. So that's sort of how like Nick from Living Querido, the publisher, found out about me because he saw that that chapbook was part of my portfolio. And he reached out to me via email to hire me as a designer actually for the publisher. And then he saw the cover and was like, I really like the cover that you made for that. Can I read some of it? So I sent him some stories. And he was like, this is really good. And I was like, yeah, I know, like no one wants to publish it. And then he was like, can I read some more? I was like, sure, whatever. Like, you're not gonna actually do anything. But we ended up talking a lot, and he sent me a contract, which is more than anyone else has ever done. So yeah, that was really interesting and very serendipitous way that I got into publishing. But it started out just like, in a workshop class, and also working with one of the professors at my college who was teaching like a Latin American stories class. And that was like the first time that I ever really saw a lot of like magical realism and like actual authors and like reading in Spanish too. And that just really like inspired the book and like opened my eyes in that way. So yeah.
That's great. I'm so happy to hear that as you took creative writing in college, you were actually reading Spanish works in your Latin American class and actually doing that work, right? Because when I was in college, which is the reason Dominican writers exist, I felt invalidated in my creative writing class because my Latino stories were always questioned. And my professor would send them back to me, and read, what is this? I don't understand these nuances, and it was my very Dominican stories. And that's when I went on Google and research who are these Latino authors that I should be reading in this class, or who are the Dominican authors. And that's what, lit up that light bulb in my head that I should create this organization to highlight works like yours.
The reason I even found like Dominican writers because I was giving my thesis to the only other Dominican professor at the school. Her name was Vanessa Lopez, and I sent it to her, and she recommended me to like check out Dominican writers and like your festival and all the stuff that you guys do, because I think she's also based in New York. So.
She's on our mail list. I keep track of people. That's wonderful. So I'm glad. I'm glad that your experience is different from mine eons ago. I'm not going to tell you the exact date I was in college, but I'm so happy about that. Another thing that made me really proud listening to your Las Musas podcast was that you said that this book was written for Dominicans and that you only care about Dominican reviews. And please don't get offended, folks, please, if you're not Dominican, but please elaborate on that.
Yeah, I feel like just whenever I write, like, or as I was like continuing writing, like in college, I think I started out with like a poetry class, and I was like, maybe I can't write because like this is not working for me. But I feel like also going to art school, a lot of like the way the discipline worked was like very artsy and like very open to different forms of writing. So yeah, I feel like as I was going through, like I was realizing like, oh, like why is like Spanish always like italicized in like books? And like what is it about like certain books in Spanish that makes it like cringy to me when I'm like reading it? And it was just like pointing out like those things and being like, okay, so I don't want to do that. And I just want to like write what I'm writing. And like the people that get it. And then, like if you don't, then you don't. And that's like fine. Not everything has to like be for you. And also like hearing like reviews and trying to get like, you know, recommendations for stuff, I started noticing like certain things that like white people certainly like in like books and that others don't. And a lot of it also has to do with like just different forms of storytelling. I feel like, you know, American white European stories are very like just like a linear like order, and it has like all these rules, and I really hate rules. Yeah, and I even like wrote because I wrote an essay for my thesis on that, on how different forms of storytelling worked. Because the first book that I connected to while at college was Louise Erdrich's work, and she's like a Native American writer, and she wrote a lot about like how like non-Western writing could work, because a lot of it is just like the way that we talk, like when we're in a communal setting, you don't always go like, oh, A, B, C, D. Sometimes you go A over here and whatever, but like it's really dynamic, and like you really engage with people when you're telling stories, like within like families and within different contexts like that. So that's really like what inspired me to do that, and I want to continue doing that. And again, no offense every way, or yes offense, but like I really just don't care.
I'm so happy to hear that. It's just so, if you're Dominican, you know what she means by when we get together and start storytelling. Okay, you know exactly what she means. So your publisher, Levin Querido, was interested in publishing your stories, and they wanted stories from this collection, right, from these theses. As you began to thread these new pieces for the Beléns and Jimenez family, what kinds of stories that you know right off the bat were needed in order to capture the Dominican diaspora?
Yeah, so I feel like in writing it, like the process a lot was like taking a memory and like just writing it straightforward as like that memory, and then like finding like what the actual like theme of it is, and then like expanding on that, and then like layering the characters and the fiction over it. So it's very like arduous process. But I knew that like the center of like the stories, the first story I wrote was the first one in the book called Stickball, and that was based on like a nostalgia like prompt and feel. But I knew that like the themes of the work and like the thread would be like masculinity and like toxic masculinity. And so whenever I was like getting a new one, I was like, okay, where can I like tie this back? Or sometimes it was just like, what is like another like face of this where like this might show up. Like I have one where there's like just two girls, but like how does it show up even though there is no men in the story? Like how does that actually work in that space? So I think always just like finding like that North Star that I was going to whenever I would get lost and like not know where something was going was really helpful.
Speaking of machismo, right? You're not afraid to call out aspects of Dominican culture that are problematic, right? Like machismo and the stigma of mental health that a lot of Latinos feel like is non-existent. Like, what is it we say? Ponte viva Peru and just get out the door. Like, you'll be fine. What's depression? But how do you arrive to the decision to tackle these subjects?
I mean, I think again, like the first story being like Stickball, that was based on like my father would like tell stories where he is about how he would just get possessed as a child, and my grandma would like tell him the stories too, and he would just like get up and like start walking and like just like come to like later, and she had to like exercise that out of him. So that was like the idea behind the first one. I was like, okay, what if you have this character that he got possessed a lot and he would like go back into like his memories a lot? What would that look like? And also like the question was like, why was he like doing that? So then in figuring out the why, and that the why obviously had to do with like his mental health and these memories that were obviously like haunting him and like doing all of this harm even like as he was an adult and had been past that. I feel like that like finding out that that was the theme made it like easier to find it in other places throughout the book.
How do you feel about having instances like that when someone is possessed being identified as magical realism, right? Because it's real to us. It's very real. It's not magic and it's not make-believe. We actually experience these things, especially, the African diaspora. It's all rooted from our African ancestry, our spiritualism and whatnot. But when it comes to publishing and how the white gaze looks at it, it's considered magical realism.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And it's also something that I think I noticed in a previous interview as well, that these stories that we tell, they're as real as if they were actual fact. And people tell them in communal settings as if they were fact as well. So yeah, I feel like Nick, my editor, would often say I don't know what's real and what's not, but he was sort of okay with that. Whereas sometimes when I would send the stories to magazines and stuff, I would get feedback being this is very good and very well put in, but I find a disconnect in this, and they would say something racist, and I'd be okay, I don't care. So I just I feel like people have to sometimes be comfortable with the not knowing, and that's sort of where I can tell who you are as a reader and the type of things that you read and have been exposed to. Because I personally, I love it when I don't know what's going on in a story or whatever. And I feel a lot of TV shows now are a little bit more that space, Atlanta and Rami and stories like that. Those are magical realism, but told in a story form, and it's beautiful and wonderful, and you have that visual thing to connect to. Maybe that makes it easier for some people, but yeah, it's just something that I personally like. And again, is it real? Is it not? I'm not going to tell you.
And my thing is, if you don't understand it, go do some research, right? Because you could learn so much just by researching those things about our Latino culture and realizing that, oh, this is something, that happens. So when I was studying mental health, we had to study, all kinds of Latin American culture, so that when we had clients, we understood, what they were talking about. No, I'm not schizophrenic just because you see me talking to un santo y prendiendo un velón in the house, right? Those are things that are normal to us and are part of our traditions. And once we put in a book, it's questioned and validated, and they're did this really happen? Is this real? And the whole disconnect thing and the microaggressions that you get back from editors in an email that totally disappoints you and makes you feel that maybe I shouldn't be writing, right? I get that a lot from a lot of the writers that we do consultations with. So in the story Skipping Stones, we get to know Anna. She's the youngest of the sisters in the Beléns family. She's the only one of the sisters who speaks Spanish and the only one who takes up on her parents' offers to visit her grandparents in the Dominican Republic. The story touches on this seesawing between DR and the United States, and how for Anna's father, money is no object to go visit DR. As a writer, what was it like to describe this feeling of being in between cultures on the page?
Yeah, I feel like it was easy. So this was my life. I feel like we go back to DR pretty often. And usually it's the only vacation that we take. It's either go to DR or have a vacation. And it's usually always we're gonna go to DR anyways. So yeah, I feel my dad and my parents really have that similar attitude of if you want to go to DR, we'll find a way to make sure that you're gonna get there, even if it means that we don't have the money right now, or find a way for you to get there. And I feel even my extended family and my cousins, it's always sort of been that way. But for her especially, just going between these two cultures, she's like me and not like me, and that I feel my brother especially would go back a lot more often than I would, and he would take any opportunity to go. And I was always a little bit more oh, this is a lot of money that you're wasting, or we need to get a job now. You're getting into college, you have to spend this time finding internships and stuff like that. And he would always just say yes and go. So I feel in that way, she's a little bit more similar to him than to me. Yeah.
That's, comes to think of it, I think Dominican's only vacation in DR. You know how many times I told my friends, there's Jamaica, there's Colombia, there's Europe. You're going to DR again? But now I've become that person. Yeah, don't go. JetBlue is scandalous right now. They're real messy. But like my son, I take him to the DR all the time. But my intention is that he's very Americanized, and he's he's from the Yo no Sabo generation. And if you don't know what that means, is the kid who is totally Americanized but understands Spanish but refuses to speak it. That's my kid. So when we go to DR, it's my intention that he gets to know what my homeland is, because I was born there, and that, you know, he starts relating to our people in a different scenery. So now I become that mom. It's like, yeah, we're going to DR again. That's our vacation again. But that whole ni de aquí ni de allá is very, you know, straddling those two borders. It's something that many of us immigrants experience. Your mom was probably born there, right? And she probably experiences that, going to DR and feeling like you're not from there anymore because so many things have changed and your life has changed. And then coming back here and feeling like, oh, you're not American enough. So I think you did a wonderful job with that story. What would you say was the most difficult story for you to write? And can you share without giving away any spoilers?
I feel like they were all like, felt like just churning out pieces of my soul. Like I'm a very slow writer. But luckily my editor, Nick, gave me the time and leeway to not, you know, bother me or press on me too much about it. I think probably Life After the Storm took me a long time to write, just because I didn't know like the direction that it was going. And that's a story about a kid from New York who had just been, you know, expelled or suspended from his school. And he doesn't really know like where he fits in the US, and he doesn't feel like he really belongs here. And then he's getting a visit from Gabriel, who is the main character from other stories, but he's the one that keeps getting possessed. So him meeting Gabriel sort of sets off this magic that happens, and yeah, so we have to read to find out. But I feel like that was really hard. It's also like, I think the longest story, because I just kept going on. I'm like, oh, now there's more stuff, and now I have to like resolve all these things that are happening. And it was based on like a dream that I had where I like went back and like became all of my ancestors, and then like I woke up crying and like in tears. But it was really like impactful and like sort of shifted my perspective a lot, which you can sort of see happening for main character George in the book. So yeah.
Thank you. Now, when you had your thesis, you only had 5 short stories. How did you decide that it was going to be 11? Or did you have more and you ended up not including it in the book?
So at like the beginning of 2020, I had like left my job and I was like just freelancing. And I kept having like ideas for like new stories, and I'd be like, man, I wish someone would just like pay me to like finish writing these. And then it happened later that year. So I was like, oh, like I can actually do, because I would just like write notes and like save them there. But yeah, I didn't really know like how many I wanted, but I did have like sort of like a list of things that I wanted to like get through. I think, I don't know if there's like one that like I was thinking about, but I couldn't figure out a way to do it. It was like just something with like church and like going to church. So I feel like Spanish church and Dominican church is like its own thing. So, but yeah, that would be like the only one that I could think of. But I didn't have like a story for it. So I finished writing when I was like, I don't think there's like anything else that I need to say. Yeah.
Okay. I'm always curious about that, because so many authors end up cutting off a chunk and that never makes it into their book. So you include Dominican slang and sometimes full sentences in Spanish without a direct translation following them. Why was that important to you? Was that important? Was it something that you felt you had to advocate with your publisher?
Yeah, so like I was just saying before, like just noticing things from like different books that like I didn't like and that would make it feel like cringy. That was mostly what I was like worried about, was like the way that I incorporated Spanish, even like James Baldwin, like when he writes like French stuff, he doesn't like translate it. He'll write like a paragraph in French and not like translate it, and then like just go back to English. And you have to sort of just figure it out from the context. But yeah, I feel like that's like a better way to like do things. I wish we could have just like captions like in books, but like I'm still trying to like figure out different ways to like incorporate the languages that doesn't feel isolating to native speakers as much as it is isolating to like white people, because I care more about the native speakers than I do about the people that aren't understanding it as much. I didn't really have pushback at all from the publisher. They just sort of let me do my thing. And I feel like I had, executive decision to like veto any of the edits that would come in. And often I would just be like, this is a Dominican thing, and then just like stud and like just keep moving forward. So yeah, that was my main concern, just making sure everything sounded like as natural as possible.
It seems you were in a blessed situation with your publisher. Elizabeth Acevedo has mentioned in the past that she refuses to use footnotes or translate any of her Spanish. She feels that if you don't get it, go get you a dictionary. And I totally agree with that, because when we're reading books in English and there's something that we don't understand, we go and figure out what that word means. So why can't everyone else do the same for Spanish, right? So I'm glad that you didn't have that back and forth with your publisher and that it was accepted right off the bat. In writing High Spirits and filling out the lives of these individual family members, did you come to a new realization on the Dominican diaspora experience?
Interesting question.
That you made.
I feel like just like going through it, like I would often just like, in order to get like inspiration for stories, I would just like call my mom like midnight or like my brother often as well. So I feel like I learned more just like about my own family and like our own like history. I got a lot of gossip, a lot of tea. And some of them I was like, I could write it, and then I was like, no, it's too spicy. I can't like air out dirty laundry like that. So yeah, I feel like that's been like more of like the revelation. And also like I feel like more, I guess, secure in like my identity and like my Dominicanness definitely than I did like when I was first starting out college. And yeah, I feel like I know like what I am, and I'm like that in between, and I'm fine with that. I'm like mixed, a quarter white, like I'm okay with like just being in that space as well.
I'm happy to hear that. I was going to say something about oh my God, I lost my train of thought. Let's go to the next question. I'll come back to it. So in the story, Vamos para la Playa, you write about Giancarlos, who's adopted into the Beléns family. And after being abandoned at a young age by an alcoholic birth mother, the other Beléns kids are visiting the fictional Dominican town of Hidalpa from the United States and Puerto Rico, and he observes them, keenly aware of their differences in language, color, and more. Is Giancarlo symbolic of anything or anyone? Who did you have in mind when you constructed this character?
I don't know if I had like anyone in particular in mind. I feel like also like talking with my friends, like there's like a lot of like just like adopting, and like also I feel like there's not like step siblings or step whatever like in our culture. Everyone's just like all family, even if there's like stories behind that or whatever, everyone just sort of gets accepted as the child. And I feel like my grandmother also, like I'd hear stories a lot about her, like adopting a lot of children. So a lot of times when we went back, they'd be like, oh, this is like your aunt, like you don't know her, but she used to live in the house for a little bit of time. So, that was something that she did. And it feels like she always just like, making food for everyone, like, and taking in kids from the community. So that's just something that like I wanted to address in a story. And also the fact that even though like everyone is like Afro-Dominican or whatever, there's still like the differences in colorism and like how to best address that. Yeah, and I feel like always like growing up, you would like, get told like this is your cousin or this is whoever, and then they would be the one sort of like in charge of like taking you around to different places. And so just writing from the perspective of, them in that position of having to take care of us. I feel like also like I felt not recently, but in the past couple of years, like not knowing as much about you know, how the immigration process works, and the fact that like when I was really little, I was like, why don't they like visit us? Like, why don't they like come here? And like it just now it's been like years and years of them trying to like get a visa to actually come over to the US. And like I felt like really like stupid about that. I was like, of course they can't come here, like because I have an American passport and they have the Dominican one. So it's not as easy as just like them hopping up on a plane like it is for me. So I felt definitely like that privilege and like that level that we have, even being like marginalized in this country. You do have like a privilege when you like go into other countries, even if they're your own countries like the DR. So yeah.
Speaking of adopting people, I'm like, do we even use the legal adoption process? Because I think as Latinos, we just bring people into our family, we embrace them, we'd be like, this is your primo, your tío, and then later when they pass away, you found out there was no blood relation. But this person always came to the Thanksgiving dinners, and you know, we even do this with our exes, right? You'll go to dinner and you find out that your mom invited your ex-boyfriend because he's now part of the family. You know, he's otro hijo más now, right? So it's difficult. So my question prior to this, where I lost my train of thought, was you were talking about the chismes and the secrets in the family, and we all have. Just check your Latino family, okay? We all have those. Are you working on a new body of work? And are any of those stories going to make it in there with fictional characters where you put a disclaimer, you know, like they do in the movies, if any of these characters resemble you? Or if the shoe fits, it's probably you, right?
Yeah, so I currently have like a new deal. I'm currently working on another YA novel, which I feel like this story is more like, you know, the masculinity and the masculine side, whereas that one I was also working on in college, and that was more like the feminine side of things. It's a little bit more fun and like upbeat and like lighter, so it's not like as heavy and dark. And I was like, great, I can like take a rest on my soul. But yeah, I don't know if like anyone exactly would be there. I feel like it's also difficult because it's not like a short story collection. It's just like a straightforward novel, and I've never done that before. So definitely taking inspiration from like some of my cousins and things, but I feel like, yeah, there's like 3 main characters, and I feel like they're all just like a great mixture of things. I feel like 2 of them are like my yin and yang of myself, and then like one of them is like more like my cousin and my friends.
As the last question, what do you want people to take away from reading this collection of stories?
Not sure. I guess that you enjoy reading it and then it's good. I feel like when I was doing the workshops like in college, like I could see the response every week as like I would bring the new stories, and it seemed to like connect with everyone, like especially other immigrants and children of immigrants like in the room. So that was just like interesting to see. So I definitely hope it connects to different people, and most predominantly like young Dominican people. And like the book I dedicated to like a young Dominican girl who has too many hobbies like myself. And I hope that like she finds the book and sees herself in it a little bit. So yeah.
Thank you, Camille, for joining me in this conversation. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Please purchase the book, and more importantly, review it, especially if you're Dominican. Okay, those are the reviews that we really want.